Good morning and welcome inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room here in Mission Control Center in Houston, Texas. As today, 2 NASA astronauts prepare to exit the International Space Station and out into space for U.S. Spacewalk 96 to install hardware that will modify the space station's 3B power channel and prepare it for future installation of an International Space Station rollout solar array. Good morning, everyone. Joseph Zakshesky and Ken Appel with NASA Communications here to bring you this spacewalk as today.
Copy. We'll perform step 7, and I'll come back to you when we're ready for you to continue.
Okay, sounds good.
Today is the 281st spacewalk in support of the International Space Station assembly, maintenance, and upgrades. And it is a part of a busy month of spacewalks in the month of August and the very first of Expedition 75. This will also be the 4th spacewalk of 2026. As you take a look around the room here in Mission Control Houston, you will be hearing communications quite often between the crew on the ground as well as the crew aboard the International Space Station as the teams continue preparations for today's spacewalk. Let's take a closer look at the 2 NASA astronauts that will be participating in U.S. Spacewalk 96, as well as the support team. And it will be Jessica Meir that will serve as EV1, and Anil Menon, the flight engineer aboard the International Space Station, as EV2. And throughout today's spacewalk, we will be able to identify the 2 of them, as Meir will have the red stripes, as you can see at the bottom left corner of her portrait, and Anil Menon will have no stripes on his spacesuit. Taking a look at their career stats for spacewalks for Jessica Meir, it has been a busy time for her aboard the International Space Station, especially this most recent expedition from 74 into 75. This will be her 3rd run of her current time aboard Space Station and 6th overall, previously conducting 5 spacewalks totaling 36 hours and 6 minutes. Her most recent spacewalk was back at the end of June for U.S. Spacewalk 95, and then she also participated in U.S. Spacewalk 94 back in March, both of those with NASA astronaut Chris Williams, which Williams returned to Earth and would officially close out Expedition 74 and bring on Expedition 75 with the arrival of Anil Menon. And for Anil, this will be his very first spacewalk of his NASA career. It is again the 281st spacewalk in support of space station assembly, maintenance, and upgrades, the 4th of 2026, and of course the first spacewalk for the newly minted Expedition 75. As we welcome you back inside Mission Control Houston in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. We're currently in a communications handover with the International Space Station, and we will bring you those live views of the astronauts in Anil Menon and Jessica Meir here shortly as they continue their pre-breathe procedures as they prepare to venture out into the vacuum of space again for U.S. Spacewalk 96. Supporting both Jessica and Anil Menon today are going to be NASA astronauts Jack Hathaway and Sophie Adno of ESA, and these 2 have supported so far every spacewalk that they have been on board inside the International Space Station, supporting Jessica Mears. Again, spacewalk number 94 and 95. That was back in March and back in June. So Jack Hathaway and both Sophie Adno in their first missions aboard the International Space Station. Both of them arrived to the station back in February as a member of NASA's SpaceX Crew 12 on February 13th, and they're currently operating on their 174th day aboard the orbiting laboratory. As the teams here on the ground are currently executing a handover inside of Mission Control, let's take a closer look at who is supporting today's spacewalk from the ground in Mission Control in Houston. As he hands over control from the Orbit 1 to the Orbit 2 team, it'll be Spacewalk Flight Director Ronak Dave that will take the helm. Stephanie Wilson, NASA astronaut, will be the spacewalk communicator. We'll be hearing many communications between her and the crew outside, so that'll be with both Jessica and Anil throughout the day today. Aki Hoshide of JAXA will be the Capcom. He will communicate with the crew inside the International Space Station. Again, that crew of 7, so he will be handling communications of everything internally. Steve Villano, along with Drew Burr and Lucas Winder, will work things out as the lead spacewalk officer and task officers for today's spacewalk. And Matt Hahn and Andrew Francis will support the spacesuit and airlock operations. And there is our first looks live inside of the Quest airlock aboard the International Space Station. And there you can see NASA astronaut Anil Menon on the left-hand side, and Jessica Meir, the commander of the International Space Station, on the right-hand side. And throughout today's spacewalk, we will have Jessica. She will have the red stripes that'll be featured on the cuff of her pants, and we'll keep an eye out for her identification markers. And for Anil Menon, he will be in no stripes. And on the near side, against the wall, is Jack Hathaway, one of the 2 astronauts supporting today. And right on cue is going to be Sophie Adno, that's also supporting preparations for today's spacewalk. Again, the crew is currently executing their pre-breathe procedures, and they will do so for about 2 hours. They're about halfway through that point, and that is when they are breathing pure oxygen to remove nitrogen from their blood supply, and it helps avoid decompression sickness, or the bends, as they transition from the International Space Station to the vacuum of space. In terms of air pressure, the space station operating close to sea level that we experience here on Earth, and of course bringing it down to vacuum when they venture out into space. The astronauts have already completed some light exercises, or ISLE, where they complete those exercises in their suit. And that's all part of the pre-breathe procedures to help the body absorb oxygen faster. So these 2 crew members and their support crew, and Sophie Adno and Jack Hathaway, are currently in the equipment lock of the Quest airlock. This is where they get suited up and do the initial checkouts. The leak checks, which they performed earlier, all went well, and they'll continue to do checks on inspections of gloves, equipment. They'll test out their helmet cameras, which we will get great views from those as the spacewalk progresses. They'll also add their MEDOX canisters, or metal oxide canisters, that help scrub carbon dioxide from the astronauts as they perform their spacewalk today. And then eventually they'll move into the background, which is the crew lock, as Sophie Adno is floating that direction. And once we get a greater look, you'll see the equipment that'll be used for today's spacewalk. So let's take a look at what exactly these 2 astronauts, and Anil Menon and Jessica Meir, will be up to today outside of the International Space Station. This is to install a mod kit on the 3B mast canister that'll again help the International Space Station prepare for the future installation of a International Space Station Rollout Solar Array, or IROSA. Now, these solar arrays will be delivered later this year on NASA's SpaceX's 35 Commercial Resupply Services mission, and overall will be the 7th IROSA that will provide additional power to support critical station operations, including the safe and controlled deorbit. So these 2 will be building out that modification kit that'll be assembled on the canister itself. They'll also run the cables that will be needed to power that IROSA during that future EVA, and of course set up that EVA for future success and put it in a good configuration before eventually meandering back into the Quest airlock to complete today's spacewalk. And to better help illustrate where exactly these astronauts will be traversing today, if they were to leave the Quest airlock towards the middle of your screen and make their way down what would be the left-hand side of this graphic, the 3B section is where they will be operating today. And again, adding that modification kit to that canister for the rollout solar array. Now, a similar spacewalk was conducted earlier this year. We mentioned Jessica Meir, part of U.S. Spacewalk 94 with Chris Williams back on March 18th. That was to help complete the modification and mounting hardware of the 2A channel highlighted in green. And they would also complete the work done initially by Nicole Ayers and Ann McLean back in May of 2025 when they would help build that out. So at the completion of today's spacewalk, the yellow looking to turn green, and then the 2 rollout solar arrays that will again fly up on a later cargo flight, NASA SpaceX's 35 later this year. Those will then be a part of future EVAs to roll out the IROSAs. And if you're curious what the IROSA looks like, you can move all the way to the right-hand side of that image, and there you can see 2 rollout solar arrays. It's a great example that go over top of the International Space Station's current solar arrays. So as we make our way back inside the Quest airlock, again, the crew, Jessica Meir on the right-hand side, up against the wall, and Neil Menon on the left-hand side, currently operating through their pre-breathe procedures, and will continue to work towards their checklist as Jack Hathaway in the foreground, working with the teams here on the ground. And again, we'll hear additional communications and expedited communications as the crew got to work earlier this morning in preparation for today's spacewalk. In about 5 minutes or so, the crew relayed earlier that they would begin.
Airlock, just want to think. I think we're still waiting in step 7. Just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Okay, Jack, we are still working through step 7. We expect about 5 more minutes before we'll be able to give you go in step 8. However, when you get to the designated time for MEDOX changeout at 11:15, you are go for MEDOX changeout.
So I understand that you guys are working 7, and we're going to leave the cameras on until you guys are done with that. But I understand we can get started now with a couple pet steps, and then at 11:15, we're ready for the first MEDOX spot.
Good read.
Communication between the team here on the ground and with NASA astronaut Jack Hathaway is.
First MEDOX canister for EV1 is 1033, and Silt's got it up in the camera if you want to see.
Good number.
And Sophie Adno showing great displays is what Jack Hathaway is communicating down to the teams on the ground, the metal oxide canister that they will install in the back of the spacesuits of Jessica Meir and Anil Menon.
Okay. And Sophie's going to unlatch Jessica's ETA and rotate her forward so she's got access.
We copy.
So as the crew and the support team of Jack Hathaway and Sophie Adno working with the support team here on the ground, continuing to work through those procedures. And again, they were talking about the metal oxide canisters, or MEDOX, that we will hear. We'll hear a lot of acronyms throughout today, but that metal oxide canister is placed inside the spacesuit, and that is to remove carbon dioxide during today's spacewalks. And it can be used multiple times, and once a spacewalk is completed, they can recharge those canisters. So they're working through the equipment themselves, the serial numbers, and sharing down with the crew. And ultimately, it will be installed in the backpack, or the PLIS, the Portable Life Support System, mounted on the back of today's spacewalkers. And again, Jessica Meir slowly tilted a little bit facing towards the camera will be EV1 wearing the red stripes, and Anil Menon will be on the left-hand side, and now an above view camera of Anil facing down as the crew, again, continuing to work through their procedures. They also mentioned HECA cameras. Those are the cameras that are mounted on the spacesuits themselves, the high definition extravehicular mobility unit camera assembly. And that's where we're going to get great views from the astronauts as they venture out into space and perform today's spacewalk. Once all the procedures are completed and the checkouts are done, they will then install their safers to the backside of their spacesuits. That is the simplified aid for EVA rescue. Those are nitrogen thruster-powered backpacks that are added to their portable life support systems and worn by the astronauts during a spacewalk on board the International Space Station. And they act as a self-rescue jetpack, providing 6 degrees of freedom and ultimately needed if a astronaut were to become untethered and be able to safely make their way back to the orbiting laboratory. So again, we welcome you back aboard the International Space Station in preparations for today's U.S. Spacewalk 96 with NASA astronauts Jessica Meir and Anil Menon, as the two, Jessica on the right side, Anil in his spacesuit on the left-hand side, receiving support from Jack Hathaway, NASA astronaut, in preparations for today's spacewalk. We're just moments away from the installation of the metal oxide canisters. And you can see Jack working through those procedures with the team and the support group on the ground, again, helmed by Ronak Dave, flight director inside of the International Space Station Flight Control Team, and his Momentum Flight Control Team, taking over today's spacewalk duties from Elias Mirmo and the Orbit 1 team and his service flight team. In the background, again, the crew currently in the equipment lock of the Quest airlock aboard the International Space Station. But in the background, you see the equipment necessary to complete today's spacewalk. On the portion of the top left-hand side, you can see the struts that'll be required to install the 3B mod kit to the 3P mast canister of the International Space Station, and that involves 6 different struts and a mounting bracket that the two astronauts will assemble from start to finish. That bag is about 8 feet long and over 300 pounds here on Earth, and of course in space, though seemingly weightless, still carries that mass with it. And though out of sight, Sophie Adno currently working on the portable life support system on the backside of NASA astronaut Jessica Meir, installing the Medox canister. And there you can see Sophie swinging Jessica back up against the wall of the equipment lock as that canister put into place. Anil Menon on the left-hand side in his spacesuit, preparing for what will be his very first spacewalk of his career, will have his metal oxide canister installed as well. And they'll continue to go over multiple checks and safety inspections before coming off of the wall and making their way into what would be the crew.
Serial number for Anil for EV2 is 1034.
Good number.
So now you get a great view of Sophie Adno swinging NASA astronaut Anil Menon off of the equipment lock to install his metal oxide canister and unzipping the backside of the portable life support system. That backpack mounted on the back of the astronauts provides everything that they will need for today's spacewalk: self-contained, breathable atmosphere, cooling, power, and all that they can carry with them to work out into the vacuum of space for today's U.S. Spacewalk 96 and install the mod kit to the 3B canister of the International Space Station. And again, that is for the future installation of an International Space Station rollout solar array. For the astronauts in the spacesuits, continuing to also work through their pre-breathe procedures. And they did so about an hour and a half ago, began those pre-breathe procedures, breathing pure oxygen to remove nitrogen from their blood supply, and that helps avoid decompression sickness from going to a higher pressure, which is inside the International Space Station, down to vacuum at the lowest of pressures out in space. And these astronauts also did some light exercises to help speed up that process and get the oxygen supply into circulation faster. Divers experience these adjustments below the surface of the water here on Earth. Jack Hathaway, NASA astronaut in the foreground. Sophie Adno of ESA working on the portable life support system of NASA astronaut Anil Menon on the left-hand side of our view here today inside the Quest airlock of the International Space Station, installing the metal oxide canisters.
We're pausing the EMU pre-breathe in suit clock, GMT 1121.
And we welcome you back inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room inside of Mission Control Center, Houston, Texas, as we are experiencing a communications handover in satellites. And we will rejoin the crew aboard the International Space Station here shortly. And there you can see a great view of Flight Director Ronak Dave. That'll be on tap for today's spacewalk. He and his Momentum flight team just completed a handover. Sitting immediately to his right is Stephanie Wilson. Then she will be the spacewalk communicator for today's activities outside of the orbiting laboratory. She will be the one that you will hear the voice of often talking with Jessica Meir and Anil Menon. And immediately to her right is Aki Hoshide. He'll be the Capcom for today's events. He'll be the one communicating with the Expedition 75 crew aboard the International Space Station. And as we resume contact, we return back inside the Quest airlock of the International Space Station as Jack Hathaway and team continuing to work through today's procedures ahead of U.S. Spacewalk 96. And then as actually look to the bottom left where Anil Menon is up against the wall of the equipment lock, you can see one of the key tools that'll be used for today's spacewalk. That is the pistol grip tool that'll be used to help assemble the 3B mod kit to the 3B canister of the International Space Station. That is the power drill, or a non-powered ratchet wrench that'll be used to help secure bolts and pins. Jessica Meir will also be equipped with that tool as well, as the two will work in tandem throughout today's spacewalk to assemble that 3B mod kit that again consists of 3 struts. They'll build an upper triangle and then have a right side and a left side that they will attach to the 3B canister. And once affixed with the center mounting bracket, that bracket will support the future installation of an International Space Station rollout solar array. And those arrays, again,
airlock in step 18. The expended MEDOX for EV2 was 0022, and the expended MEDOX for EV1 was 0020. And also, we didn't hear you verify this earlier in step 11. Our GMT for the pause was 1121.
And station, this is flight. We copied 1121. We're getting Aki enabled here. And good numbers on the MEDOX as well.
So the teams here on the ground working with Jack Hathaway there in the foreground, relaying the good information relayed about the metal oxide canisters that again will scrub carbon dioxide from the spacesuits of Jessica Meir on the right-hand side and Anil Menon on the left-hand side. And again, for Jessica Meir today, it will be her 6th spacewalk of her NASA career, her 3rd during this recent stay aboard the International Space Station when she would fly up on NASA's SpaceX Crew 12 back in February. And currently operating on her 174th day in microgravity. And for Anil Menon, he would join the International Space Station's crew of 7 and would briefly be a part of Expedition 74 and officially kick off Expedition.
Clock resumed, GMT 1125.
Copy 1125. Good morning, Jack.
Yes, sir.
And there you heard the return calls from Aki Hoshide, again, today's Capcom that will be communicating with the astronauts inside the International Space Station. And Stephanie Wilson, the spacewalk communicator, will join in once both Mir and Anil Menon venture out into space. They continue to work through their pre-breathe procedures ahead of today's spacewalk. And again, for Jessica Meir, her 6th EVA, 3rd during her current mission as a member of NASA SpaceX Crew 12, the current International Space Station commander. And for Anil Menon, who just arrived a little more than 22 days ago after launching on July 14th from the Baikonur Cosmodrome as a part of Soyuz MS-29, and a great above-camera view of Anil as he works through his, again, pre-breathe procedures ahead of his very first spacewalk. This is Mission Control Houston as we look inside of the Quest airlock of the International Space Station as NASA astronauts Jessica Meir and Anil Menon prepare to venture out into the vacuum of space for U.S. Spacewalk 96 in preparation of a 3B mod kit to the 3B mast canister.
We have successful manual leak checks, and we're back into procedure 1.225, step 17.
Copy that. Thanks.
Jack Hathaway and Sophie Adno supporting today's spacewalkers. Jessica Meir on the right-hand side, Anil Menon on the left in the equipment lock. And there we can see in the background a great shot through into the crew lock that they will eventually venture out into, and the equipment used for today. The larger bag that is floating towards the top of that lock is where the 6 struts and the mounting bracket that will be carried to the work site for today's spacewalk, and then the crew bag and equipment in the second bag, as we now see what will be the safers that are floating into view with ESA astronaut Sophie Adno. And these will be attached to the back of today's spacewalkers. And again, these safers, the simplified aid for EVA rescue, nitrogen thruster powered backpack used in the event an astronaut were to become untethered from the International Space Station and are able to safely maneuver back to the orbiting laboratory. So it'll be Jessica Meir that'll receive her safer first, shortly followed by Anil Menon. Again, we welcome you to today's live coverage of U.S. Spacewalk 96 as International Space Station Commander and NASA astronaut Jessica Meir alongside NASA astronaut Anil Menon will venture out to be a part of what will be a busy run of spacewalks in the month of August. The first of 3 here in the near future. For Jessica Meir, having her safer currently installed after her Medox canister just moments ago was placed inside of her portable light support system to help scrub carbon dioxide. Anil Menon on the left-hand side with his arms raised will receive a similar safer as the crew continues to work through its procedures in preparation for entering the crew lock in the background. Hatches will close, and then once that crew lock is brought down to vacuum, currently operating a little more than 14 pounds per square inch, similar to what we here on Earth would experience at sea level, will be brought down to vacuum, and the two will venture out into space. For Anil, it'll be his very first time, and for Jessica Meir, it'll be her 6th spacewalk, the 3rd of her current mission aboard the International Space Station. And that spacewalk will officially begin once the 2 crew members will switch over their equipment to battery power to mark the official beginning of today's U.S. Spacewalk 96.